blessed be. So this is going to be my 2 cents in the whole. Will reading Harry Potter make my child a witch? Tobacco. Now, for a while it's been Harry Potter. Now it's starting to move on to the Caster series. I mean, with the movie, what's this called? Beautiful Creatures coming out, and so on. Every time there's a movie with magic, some Christians will say, well, reading these books, watching these movies, this TV series, and so on, make my child into a witch. And I feel that, in a way, very few really address this. You have two groups of people who sits on either fence and just the Christians say, oh, it will do this, and the pagans say, no, it won't. Most of the rest of society also says, no, it won't. But unless things are properly explained, I think that such fears will not ease. So yeah, that's my goal, to try to explain things. Now, first of all, reading a book will not make your child anything. They can read a real occult book. They won't magically become witches. It doesn't work that way. To practice magic, you have to study it. You have to dedicate yourself to it. It's not something that just befalls you if you do such and such action, like reading a book. And I remember watching a TV debate with this, where one Christian mother says, yeah, you say these Harry Potter books are completely fine, but what if your child ran around with a pencil and pretended to be a wizard? What then? And yeah, and where's the problem here? How is this different than your daughter putting all her dolls and teddy bears up in a row and singing in front of them and pretending to be a pop star, or your son taking the box from your new stove and painting windows on it and pretending to be an astronaut? Children play make-believe. It's completely natural, it's completely healthy, and it does not make them into magic users. I mean, I often played at being a nurse when I was a little girl. It doesn't mean I'm part of the medical profession. So yeah. Now, what some Christians point out is that, but there are mention of real occult books in Harry Potter, and yeah, there is. Some of the books mentioned are actual real occult books. However, that doesn't really change things. That's like saying that if I wrote a book about being a doctor, we have a dashing Dr. Hendrickson, who is the head of his ward and has romantic relationships with all the nurses, and in the books I reference a few actual medical volumes, then suddenly people will become doctors if they read that book? No. Just having a few names of pretty well-known volumes correct does not make it authentic. So, yeah. Now, and there's another thing I've always wondered about. How is it that, for example, Harry Potter is horrible to a lot of Christians? They go ballistic over it. It is sinful, it is horrible, it is Satan's work, while they gladly buy their sons and daughters Superman comics. How is it that a boy who waves a stick around and chants Latin words, and by that fights an evil wizard, that's horrible, while a man that flies around and shoots lasers out of his eyes, that's okay? Is it the word wizard that's the problem here? If Rawlings had called it Bigga Bigga Boop instead of magic would all be fine. It's... But yeah, that's just a side comment. Now, what many ask is, can you learn magic from a piece of fiction? And I would say it depends. And by that I mean there are definite pieces of fiction where real magic and real occult philosophy are presented. For example, Garrett Gardner, the man who founded Wicca, his first books were fiction books because at the time witchcraft was outlawed in England, and those books did have real information. You could read those books and you can learn quite a bit about how to practice real witchcraft, because that's what was the point of them. They were just presented as fiction books, so he would not get arrested. And the Unfortunate, for example, a famous member of the Golden Dawn, she wrote a few fiction books as well, which contained a lot of the occult philosophy she had she studied. And this is the same that we there's been a lot of other occult authors who have written fiction, and they have included bits and pieces of their occult lore in those books, and of course then you can learn from them. And for example, when I first started out, I didn't exactly have a lot to go on. I had 2 pages with information about the black books, grimoires basically, that were in my school book on history. Yeah, we had about magic in history. I had a book about the witch hunts, which had 1 chapter in the back about the modern witch movement. And I had a set of fiction books known as Grandmother Stamson's Magical Cats. And this is a book series about a young girl called Inger Johanna, I think, and how she is initiated into a witch cult. And that witch cult is very similar to Wicca in very many ways. It's obvious that the author is either Wiccan or has studied it, because a lot of real elements are put in there, and the books were very helpful to me as I started practicing. Of course, I started practicing as a folk magician, but yeah. So you can definitely learn from fiction if real things are put in there, and often some works of fantasy are very much inspired by real elements. For example, take the Wheel of Time books by Robert Jordan. You have a lot of real mythology put in there, and as such, while the setting and the stories are completely fictional, you can gain a greater understanding and feeling with the gods, for example, by reading those books. The main character is a very good example of the sacrificed and reborn king, which is one of the archetypes of the god, for example. And the magic system is very similar to many Asian systems. It's just bumped up to make it interesting in fantasy. So you, among other things, you have a scene in the second book where one of the main characters is learning to use magic. And the instructions for how to contact this energy, it's pretty similar to what I have heard in New Age books quite a few times. You can use that exercise and you can learn to contact energy with it. Will you learn to toss fireballs? No, of course not. But you could use that, at least if you had a little bit of other knowledge. And the role-playing game Maged Ascension has very interesting concepts. And I've been inspired a lot by it in my real practice, because it while you play that game, it really forces you to question the nature of reality. And it presents the idea that our minds affect reality in a very interesting way. So, definitely fiction can inspire the use of magic. And I, for example, write up in my Book of Mirrors, which is basically your magical diary. I write up the books I read, just to keep a track on what I've read and so on. And I also usually write up the fiction books and movies about magic and so on that I watch and read and so on, because it does inspire me. But will it teach you magic? No. Not unless it was specifically designed to do so. You have a book, for example, named what is named in English? The Clandestine Prophecy. It's fiction. It's about a man who goes on a spiritual journey to find the ninth insight. But it's chock full of actual lessons. So could you learn how to practice the system this author describes for magic and self-development from reading that book? Yes, because that's the point of the book. But could you pick up any old fantasy or science fiction book and learn magic from it? No. And if we go back to Harry Potter, since that seems to be the main concern for many Christian parents, the magic in the books are very, very, very poorly explained. It is probably the work of fiction you need to worry about the least. It's what I like to call a point and proof magic system. The characters run around, they wave around the magic wand, and they say something ridiculous in Latin, and things happen. And it is never explained why. It's just because they are witches or wizards, and they have a part of a magical animal stuck into a piece of wood. Yeah, that isn't gonna teach you much. Because here's the thing. Real life magic is not the same as what you will find in fantasy. Real life witches do not go around and toss fireballs. We don't turn people into frogs and the like. A lot of magic is about self-development. It is about attracting good things into our life and expelling bad things. I do believe that magic is real and it can heal, it can do a lot of things, but not in the way that it happens in fiction. Or perhaps it is possible to do that kind of direct magic, but that would then be for the very, 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 very best of us, and I've never met anyone who can. So, no. Little Johnny is not going to start shooting fireballs out of his ass because he reads Harry Potter. Not gonna happen. Now, to the question on whatever or not the increased popularity of fantasy has increased the amount of people who come into witchcraft, and I think that actually it probably has. Now, originally when I started practicing, I was inspired by a piece of fiction. My mother always read to me before bed, and the book she read once was named The Agent from Skurk. Yes, that's exactly what it's named. Skurk. Love that title. Anyway, it's about a young witch girl who fights an alien who tries to take over the world with a sleep ray. Or was it a sleep potion? Anyway, his evil plan was to put everybody on Earth to sleep, and then his species would just take over the whole place. So yeah, and when my mother read that book to me, I got very interested in this, and later when I then watched a television show where there were people who really were practicing real life magic, I decided to start practicing. Now, did that book make me a witch? No, of course not. But did it inspire me? Yes. And I think that a lot of people who watch Charmed, who read Harry Potter, who watch the cast, read the cast here, watch that new movie that's come out for it, and so on, can become inspired and thereby seek to Wicca, paganism, and other magical paths. I think that it can inspire people and make people go into that direction, yes. However, I also think that if you don't have a calling in your heart to practice magic, you won't stay in it. And if you have that calling, it doesn't matter if these pieces of fiction are available or not. I think that if I had grown up with a strictly Christian mother who refused me any sort of fantasy or science fiction, I would still eventually have found magic. Could it have taken a little bit more time? Yes. But I feel that I'm called to it. And I also think that one of the really big reasons why paganism and other forms of magical paths are on the rise is that it's become more accepted. When I became a Wiccan when I was 14, I've been practicing for a few years before that in other paths, but yeah, I became a Wiccan. Nobody knew what that was. If I said I was a witch, they looked at me and said, "Oh, are you completely out of your mind? Insane? What are you talking about?" And now if I say I'm a witch, people ask me, "Oh, are you a Wiccan then, or more generic pagan?" Because it's become known, it's become part of society. And I mean, I was almost shocked the first time I heard Wicca mentioned in a TV series that had nothing to do with it. It was an average type of sitcom, and it was just mentioned casually. And I was thinking, oh wow, because that was the first time you saw that. Now it's pretty common. There's a lot of movies where you have a Wiccan character. It doesn't need to be a fantasy movie, just like you might have a Christian character or a Muslim character or any other faith character, you can have a Wiccan character. And I think that that greater accept in society also have made it more popular. And also, of course, availability is a big thing because it wasn't easy to get into magic earlier because, like I said, I had very little to work with when I started. And gone a few more years, you would have almost nothing unless you were lucky enough to find a coven willing to teach you, or join an order like the Golden Dawn, depending on what type of magic you were into. Now about any bookstore has books on it. And I think that for our time, there's a lot of people who are seeking, and witchcraft speaks to them. And this can't be blamed on fiction. Now, I do understand that if you are a faithful Christian, you might be concerned that your child read books about magic, even if those books are fiction. Because I do respect that it's part of your religion to be against the practice of magic. However, I will say that 99% sure your child will not start practicing magic, even if he or she reads these books. Just like he will not. I mean, there are a few people who might become so interested in robotics when watching Transformers that they decide to dedicate their life to that. Most just think, oh, cool robots, and then move on to the next cool thing. However, if your child becomes interested in magic from reading those books and starts to seek towards Wicca and so on, I also think that's not much you can do. I think that it's not morally right, and it is not possible to dictate the religion of others. Because if you try to force your child to be Christian, how real is it really? I mean, if you threaten them with punishment unless they go to church and practice the same religion as you, it's easy enough to say the words. But do they then feel the religion truly in their hearts? And so, yeah, no, to sum it up, Harry Potter and other pieces of fiction will not turn your child into a witch. Some people might be inspired by it to seek more knowledge about real magic, but in and of itself, Harry Potter and any other piece of fantasy is just that. It's a piece of fantasy, it's a piece of fiction. It's fun, and to quote something I found on Facebook, if reading Harry Potter makes me a witch, does watching ER make me a heart surgeon? And of course it doesn't. So yeah. Can magical fiction inspire? Yes. Can magical fiction at times have some teaching value if it is either by accident or intent or contain some real elements? Yes. Will it make somebody a magic user? No. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Have a great day, and blessed be.